last part of the Lund Architecture Film Festival. No, sorry, Lund International Architecture Film Festival. And that's why I'm speaking English here, not Swedish. And what we have left here is to deliver two prizes. One is to a student in documentary film for a short film. It's like a scholarship. And the other prize is the great film for documentary films. And this bag is inside here are the, let's see. I was shocked, it was empty. Here I have two envelopes, and I will start with the prize for the short film. And this is like the Oscar. And in this golden envelope, which is made of real gold, I have here an announcement for the first prize here, Lund International Architecture Film Festival 2016. And I'm reading here, because this is new for me, for a warm and humoristic way to depict the life of a Czech high-rise building built during Soviet communist times. 6 identical small apartments, 6 completely different homes, 6 different destinies, the same love for homes. ArchFilmLund Prize and a working grant of 5,000 Swedish crowns for Best Short Film 2016 about architecture and city goes to the Japanese-Czech film director Haruna Honkup for the film Anatomy of the Place. Of course, we would have been very happy to see Haruna here, but she couldn't come. She is in London by now. But I hope as this applause was heard over the sea to London. But we will announce to her this prize very soon. Okay. Next prize. And I read first the motivation of the jury for sensitively depicting how the city's residents deal with the grief after a difficult and dramatic earthquake in the city of Christchurch, with a particular focus on creative artistic projects in public places. The ArchFilmLund Prize 2016 and the Work Scholarship of 10,000 Swedish crowns for Best Long Documentary goes to film director Peter Young from New Zealand for his film The Art of Recovery. Congratulations! And we are very happy to have Peter Young here, and he will be introduced by David Sim, who introduced the film 2 days ago at Kino. So
I think there's a film clip.
Shall we show it first?
Okay. We will first see a small trailer, isn't it so?
It was my birthday on the 22nd of February. I had my mother and my 3 sisters with me. There was nowhere really to hide.
All I remember is the light, because the whole side of the house had gone. And I remember screaming because I was so frightened.
And it was that moment really where it struck me like, wow, hundreds of people have probably died. Just...
I like to put adults' chairs around the kids' chairs, sort of not on their own sort of thing.
All we did was turn fallow land into something kind of productive to get the public back into the central city and to buy a bit of time.
The transitional thing that's happened in the wake of the earthquake is the most exciting thing that's happened in Christchurch. No one sat down and said, we're going to start a transitional movement. It just happened because people needed something to get on with day-to-day life.
The blueprint identifies a number of key projects that will catalyse development, provide certainty, clarity, and inspire confidence.
My responsibility was to see that there was a plan delivered and that it could be a workable plan.
Exciting cities are dysfunctional and chaotic, and no one who's drawing a plan wants to write that into their plan.
That's what all this art says. There's something about us that's got nothing to do with business.
Congratulations. It's fantastic. We'll give you a couple of seconds to collect your thoughts, and I'll make a little bit of an introduction and also explain a little bit why I'm here this evening. After the 2011 earthquake, Gehl architects were appointed to help work on the recovery plan for the rebuilding of central Christchurch. And we'll talk a little bit more about the challenges of rebuilding a city the size of Malmö, where the entire city centre was destroyed. I think there was a spirit of trying to really be inclusive in that project, but in the background of the film that you're seeing today, it's other things led up to that. And for me, I would say there's a couple of things I take with me from this film. I don't know if how close to the lid. I got my notes. And there's two things I would say about this film for me. One is, or what fascinates me, it's both unique and also universal. It's unique, I think, because it's about a very special place at a very special time. It couldn't have been anywhere else. It's, and I think it's when circumstances bring changes, force challenges, open opportunities to do things differently. And this very unique situation gave a chance to sort of step out of normal life and do things like you've never done before, good or bad, pleasant or nasty. So there's a uniqueness. But at the same time, it's also, I feel, there's a universal message, because like anybody who sees the film recognizes that ability, oh, I would like to be a better neighbour. I could imagine being more creative. I have a feeling about how I would like my city to be. And I think there's maybe a frustration in most people that they're not really living their lives to their full potential, that they could be more connected and could do more. And I think it's this, you could be a better human being, be a happier human being. And I think this is what's really special about the film. On the one hand, like, it's totally unique, it's about a one-off thing in a very certain place. But at the same time, I think that was the feeling I got from the public on Friday night. The Swedes who watched the film here in Lund was, oh, like, I want to live in Christchurch. Not because I want to live in an earthquake zone or a disaster zone, but this feeling of being a more complete human being. And I think that was, the strength of the film, this combination of uniqueness and universality. So, Peter, first of all, how does this kind of film like this happen? Did you have like this idea, like you're a filmmaker? Did you be like, wow, it's an aha moment, I'm going to make a film about this? Or did that happen over time? How did it come about?
Thanks, David, and also thank you for having us here at the festival. It's a real honour to take this story to a wider audience because it's played in New Zealand, and it was the same feeling throughout New Zealand for the audiences that went to the film, was that feeling of, wanting to fulfil aspects of their life, of their community more, but it's, first and foremost, it was a celebration of what went on there. There wasn't one moment, but I recognised the huge shift in society in Christchurch and post-quake Christchurch, as we've said, and it was said in the film. It tore down the buildings, but it also broke down the fences between the buildings, and we really did look out for the neighbours. On the first day of the earthquake, and I was there for all the earthquakes, it was dark, there was no power, we had to eat by the gas barbecues, and our neighbours all gathered round at our house. My brother was in town, which I didn't know about, but he found his way home, and so it started from those little gatherings, and then it just kept on growing. And then we had those remarkable people who gave, so much of themselves. They were, one, very creative, and they were generous in their time, and they, through the yearning of wanting to have community again, because we were all in a state of shock of seeing this permanent structure and permanence in our life just be destroyed, so we needed these places to gather, and they built these very simple community places where people could gather and enjoy and talk, and anyway, there wasn't one moment. I just saw all this opportunity, and I saw Christchurch become a much more interesting and dynamic place, and it was changing so rapidly that I just thought, I need to film this. At the time of the earthquakes, I was travelling with my other documentary. It was doing festivals, so I couldn't engage immediately, but it was about a year later, maybe 18 months after the earthquake, that I had the time to pick up my camera. So I lived about 3 blocks from Central City. I just picked up my camera and began filming these events, not knowing where the story would go, what it was, but I liked the pallet pavilion, the dancer mat, the book exchange, all these things that happened.
Because I think an important thing to understand, I think when you watch the film, you see all of this, and I think Ryan, who's the young guy with the hipster guy with the beard and the cap, talking about a movement, but actually it was many different things going on independently. Mm-hmm. In a way, maybe somehow you managed to gather that together.
Yeah, that was the, I guess, in bringing, the power of film and documentary is being able to bring these stories and condense them down, not only in time but in space. So we had all these different little projects, temporary, all transitional projects that these people had established and worked in various parts of the city, but it was all in Central City, but it was a big Central City area. And so I just filmed these events and projects, and as David said, there wasn't one movement as such. I think what people came to understand was the transitional movement, which is basically creating public spaces for a temporary time, as you know, and it was Ryan and Coralie, they had the gap filler, but it was also a whole group of street artists, and these and Peter Magendi with the memorial of 185 white painted chairs. for every person that died in the earthquake. They all operated individually, but collectively they created this movement, and we got to understand the power of temporary stuff, and it informed the bigger conversation that we had at the time, which was, how do we want our new city to be? And that was the another great thing was that we started to think about how we live together, which is what we never did in our ordered society before the earthquakes. And the earthquakes also gave us all a shared experience, and it was like hitting the reset button on the city.
No, I think this thing when you talk about, firstly, from the first night, the barbecues in the back gardens, the neighbours coming together, this very basic thing about humans enjoying the company of others. Community comes from physically being in the same place. And that's something that's lost in a car-based society when everybody lives in detached houses. And again, from our side, from the Gehl view of things, we know throughout the history of humanity, human beings have lived in tribes and in clans, big households, big families, and suddenly in the late 20th century, we're all living alone. And we all know from our own experience when we're on holiday, when we go camping, when we're suddenly thrown together in situations when we're physically close to each other, even physically close to strangers, we actually enjoy those situations so much.
And also that community can be found in the most simplest of places. They turned, one of the projects for Gap Filler was a refrigerator which they turned into a book exchange, and they put it on an empty lot. And Coralie says in the film, in our interview, when they first thought of doing this project, they were saying, no, people will go and steal the books and tip it over, which would have probably happened in pre-quake Christchurch. But it just was a wonderful thing. People would go and take the books and replace books, and then they started cleaning it and taking care of it, and it just worked so well. And so that's what we did. We found community in those simple places. And the other thing was that we didn't have many choices when it came to Central City. The pallet pavilion, which we saw in that little promo, which was essentially stacks of pallets all built up, and it provided a sheltered place, and that was all. It had a wooden floor with no ceiling, but it was the only venue in town, and so everyone went there. And then as society starts being built, we end up with 3 or 4 choices, and you start to find your tribe again, or whatever. They were good times.
But I was thinking one of the things is a film about a disaster, a film about a disaster which killed more than 180 people. There's a thin line. Do you make a sad film or a happy film? How happy is a film like that allowed to be, given the tragedy behind it? And did you feel you were treading a thin line emotionally? Because especially showing the film in Christchurch, where every single person knows someone or lost someone. How did you deal with that thin line?
It was a very, very delicate line, and that's why you feel so vulnerable when you premiere your film to a full house of 800 people. But I have a close team that I work with, and mainly my editors and myself, and we make those decisions. We also gauge the feeling of the city. It premiered about, I think, 3.5 years after the earthquake, so we were all ready to move on. But we'd also been through this period, and we knew that it was special, and we needed to celebrate what that was, that era. And the reason why I wanted to put it out was because we had this other dynamic playing out in the city, which was the central government's blueprint, which they had came in essentially and imposed a blueprint on the city and said, this is what the new city is going to be like. And there was an incredible disconnect from the grassroots movement and the new city, so people felt very disempowered for quite some time. And so that's the other reason why I wanted the film out there, because I just think that it needed to inform that conversation. I think I got it right anyway, the tone, the people.
No, I think there's a wonderful scene, which for me is the probably most emotional turning point in the film, is the white chairs, and the white chairs project, which is the painted white chairs, which is itself a very strong statement. And it was interesting, you see the different international visitors coming, and everybody immediately gets it. You get the idea of different chairs, different people. And that's such a simple, strong idea. But then the woman painting the chair.
They had a working bee.
Yeah, and then people come to paint the chairs, and one of the women is just kind of happily painting. Is saying, I'm painting one for my husband. And you suddenly like, my God, she's the widow. She lost her husband. And she's painting a chair here. And that incredibly delicate subject, I mean, it could so easily be in a kind of emotional pornography kind of situation of exposing that woman and her grief, but giving her actually quite an empowered position, giving her a position to be both respectful and loving, but also having a laugh, saying, well, my husband would have liked to have had quite an important chair. And I think that was just such an incredibly beautiful, delicate moment, touching on the essence of what it was about, but without exposing anyone in a nasty sort of kind of way.
Yeah, it was one of those.
That must have been one of the hardest little bits to capture.
Well, that's the beauty of documentary, and when you feel, because it came totally, I had no idea that she had lost her husband when I interviewed her. I just went around the people painting the chairs, and it was just a gem. You're right, it was lovely the way that you could see that it was helping people move on. People felt ownership, and that's why that whole project worked so well. And as Pete, the curator who started that project, says, it was only meant to be there for 2 weeks. And 4 years later, it is the monument that people go to. They're building a permanent one now, and so it'll be very interesting to see what happens to the 185 chairs.
Another thing I asked you on Friday was this. I was quite surprised because in the film, the bad guys are also in the film. The politicians, the developers with their hard sell, and showing, and you filmed them in the nasty environment, the shiny towers, the garages with the security going up, the big fat car. We see the good people are on their bikes and walking. The bad guys are in their SUVs. Did they so willingly just walk straight into this, or that was just their natural way of being?
It was their natural way of being, but having said that, that was also the delicate line that I had to tread in that city. But we needed to show there was a degree of tension, and they weren't aware of the tension that was felt at the ground level. But those people had the same intention, which was to build the best city that they wanted. So there wasn't anything malicious in their intent. It was the way that they went about it was so different, and central government had come in and assumed, in my mind, too much control, and there was, as I said, this great disconnect. But I think that's what makes when I initially wanted to make this film, I wanted to focus just on the artists, but after filming them for a while and getting to understand the situation, I learned about their feeling of disempowerment and disconnect. So that soon became part of the story, and it needed to be part of the story.
And was that part when you, just to get financing to make the film, was that part of the edge? That was the story, that was the edge of it?
Yeah.
Because you didn't immediately get, people were not throwing money at you to make this film.
No, I went, I went 3 times up to Auckland to try and get funding for the film and to the Film Commission, and they didn't. They turned me down basically and said no, even though I knew it was the best story in town, and I tried to convince them that this art movement was wonderful. They didn't get it, and then I cut that promo, and as soon as they saw that, they understood it and they said yes. But they helped develop, and I think rightly so, the degree of tension that you need in the story. You want, when you're making a documentary, you want people to be sitting on the edge of their seats. You know, you want them to be caring for your heroes, and but it wasn't fabricated. This is what was playing out in the city, and so it was a great element, and it gave a lot more context to the art.
I think, just summing up, I think the reason it resonates beyond Christchurch, I think we're living in a time where people are feeling that they can't influence things. We're living in the time of, we're seeing Donald Trump in the US, we're seeing Brexit, we're seeing very strong political movements of disenchantment, people not trusting experts, people not trusting their politicians. And at the same time, we're seeing very negative behaviour associated with that. And what I think is maybe the touching thing in the art of recovery, we're seeing people who are disenchanted, they are frustrated, but they're somehow translating that frustration into something very tolerant and very open and creative. And I think that's, for me, the most powerful thing I take for it. And actually, people who maybe thought graffiti was vandalism, and learning in this whole situation, well, actually maybe it's art. They're actually being more open-minded rather than being less open-minded. And I think that's what we want to capture, and that's what we need everywhere else. This kind of taking your disenchantment and using it in a creative way.
Yeah, it was a shift. The interesting thing, in a way, that is the shift in the balance of power that the earthquakes gave. You know, the groups that were on the margins of society came to the fore because they reacted a lot more quickly, and they felt empowered. Then we saw it go away. In the film, so we had that dynamic playing out, but it was important that we ended with that little lightness and just to end with our heroes, because they are getting on with it and they're continuing with the transitional, and the new mayor and the deputy mayor and the council are really supportive of the transitional and what it adds to the more permanent city, and so they are incorporating that into the city going forward. It's still got its challenges, but getting back to your question is that I think there is still, quite a feeling of hope that experience that we had is going forward, and even though it's not as, I'd say, intense and dynamic as in the post-quake era, it's still with us as we go forward, and it's got to inform the future city in a good way.
Peter, thank you very much, and again, congratulations.
Thank you. And I'd just like to say thanks again for hosting us, Elzbieta. I know putting on a festival is just as hard as making a documentary, and it's a lot of work. So thanks for giving us a platform to tell these stories. It's much appreciated by filmmakers everywhere, and David. And I've got to also say thanks to the people at Christchurch who put their hat around and gathered donations to fly me here. When I got accepted into the festival, I emailed the mayor and Vicky, and that's what they did, and it's just a wonderful thing. So here we are, and I hope we've represented them well.
Thank you.
Well,